All right, and I'll just say a quick note about Mitch. A little bit hard to sum him up in just a few sentences, but you'll learn more about him. So, Mitch Weathers, based in California. He's a first and foremost, he's a teacher. Second, he's the founder of Organized Binder, Inc. He and his team work with K-12 schools and colleges across the world to equip students with executive functioning skills. When he's not working with schools, you can find Mitch running trails and training for his next ultra marathon. And I'll pass it on to you, Mitch.
All right. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks for having me. I am super excited to be back here, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I know for some of you, it's certainly later than here in California, where it's 4 o'clock. But this truly is an honor when I had the first opportunity to participate and give a webinar right about, I think it was back in March when my book first came out. And I just want to say thank you. If any of you were there for that session and you've come back all these months later, there was a kind of an outcry for the second half of what I had prepared. And that's what we're going to do today. I'll go quick intro, assuming that some of you weren't there or maybe haven't seen the recording. It's pretty simple. Go to YouTube and search for my name in Corwin or executive functions in Corwin, and you'll find that episode. But when we talk about studentness, or when we talk about executive functions, I want you to keep one word in mind. So I'm going to do this throughout our session, give you some words to keep in mind. This is not a phrase that I came up with. A school actually out here in California that we've worked with on the organized binder side of things for quite a few years. They contacted us and they had collectively come up with this goal, this mission of developing a sense of studentness in their students. And when we all started talking, it became very clear that, oh, what you're referring to are these executive functioning skills that lay the foundation for learning and kind of develop a sense of agency. And there's certainly technical or kind of academic definitions of executive functioning skills. And I just more and more come back to this phrase because I think for that teaching learning context, it really sums it up well. So think about that as we're going through and we're talking about, so the second half of this workshop, we'll cover 3 more of these executive functioning skills. And what I've seen now for a long time in my work is that when students start to develop these particular executive functioning skills, this sense of studentness really starts to develop in them. And that's what I hope you get from this talk today. Now, when we talk about executive functioning, I want you to keep one word in mind, environment. And if you're taking notes, please write that word down. And as Paul Tuff explains here, if we can improving executive function seems like a potentially promising vehicle for narrowing the achievement gap between poor and middle class kids. And here's the key. If we can improve a child's environment in ways that leads to better executive functioning, we're going to set them up for success in a very powerful way. And the reason I ask you to write that down or pause and think is that all of us, our environment's different. If you're a classroom teacher, like I was most of my career, then I can visualize my environment. If I'm a school leader, my environment's that school. If I'm a district leader, interestingly, a lot of parents have been picking up a copy of my book and reading it and thinking about, okay, how do I start to shape the environment at home? Right. So thinking about the environment and how do we start to shape the environment for our purposes today, I'm going to stick to that kind of teaching learning context and in a classroom. Okay. But for you, constantly be coming back to that. Like, how does this translate in my environment? Now, if you've read my book or you've heard me speak, you've heard me talk about teaching executive functioning skills. I'm absolutely convinced that's not true. Okay. Executive functioning skills are not taught. They're best learned when students clearly see them modeled while getting daily practice employing them by engaging in a predictable daily routine. So clarity, modeling, and routine. And so I'm going to unpack here at the beginning. And by the way, I've never met a teacher or a parent, or let's just say I've never met an educator or a parent or an adult for that matter that thinks it's not a good idea for students to develop executive functioning skills. But when we look back historically, many of these skills have just been left up to chance. And I've thought about that for a long time, and I've unpacked this in the book, and I think I figured out why. I'm actually quite certain I have. The first is if we keep it in that teacher context, you're never going to find a teacher that has an abundance of extra time on their hands, right? We never have enough time, rarely have enough time in the school day to get through what we're tasked with teaching or we want to teach. And we don't have enough time in the school year to get through what we're tasked with teaching or we want to teach. And in most cases, we don't get to choose when we go to the bathroom. There's always this scarcity, if you will, of time and almost kind of like a tyranny of the urgent. It's we just don't have the time. So where am I going to fit this in? Even if I really want my students to develop these skills and habits, which I've talked to thousands of educators, of course they think that, but realistically, where am I going to fit that in? And so one of the good news here for this session is I want you to hear this loud and clear. What I'm not here to introduce you to is a curriculum or a content on teaching executive functioning skills that you would somehow, if you're a teacher on the call, have to figure out how to embed into what you're already doing. It's just not realistic, okay? And the other is what I call the zone of genius, not my phrase either. I use this in the book to explain, I tell the story of my mom that she taught second grade most of her career. I taught ninth grade most of my career. And when I would walk into her classroom, and I know you've all had this experience, and hopefully it's your classroom if you're a teacher on the call, but walked in and you could just feel it that this was my mom's zone of genius. Like she taught second grade, she taught it really well. And she'd always scratch her head and be like, I don't know how you deal with those teenagers in ninth grade. And interestingly for me, although I was feeling that, it became very clear that like this is not my zone. Like I can't, these little kids are exhausting to me. I can't do this, right? So there's these places in life and professionally where we really find ourselves, usually through time and effort, but in a zone of genius. And what a teacher's zone of genius may not be at this point, like how do I meaningfully incorporate goal setting or showing kids how to keep a calendar with time management or flexing a student's working memory through retrieval practice and spacing? Like I want to do that stuff, but how do I fit it in? And here's my evidence for my claim here is I cannot tell you since my book came out how many veteran teachers, and I mean this like 30 years, 20 years plus, still in the classroom, switched on, doing great work, like not burnout, who've written in and said, "Oh my gosh, this is everything I've always wanted to incorporate, and I just haven't, and now I can." And so I think it's these two things combined, which kind of just keeps us from getting it. Now, if we were all together in a room, I would be asking you a question, a little geography question. What state is this? If you're from the U.S., and even if you're not, you probably know that this is Hawaii. And if I had to guess, depending on where you are, even here in sunny California, it's a lot colder and not as nice this time of year as Hawaii. And I would ask you, well, if I could take you would you want to go to Hawaii? And of course, we would all raise our hands. And I can't do that. I can't transport us there. But what I can do, the next best thing, I think, is I'm going to give you a native Hawaiian language lesson here a little bit. I have the privilege of working with some educators in schools in Hawaii, and when they read the book and started learning about what we're going to talk about today, they were like, "Oh, there's a native Hawaiian expression that absolutely wraps this up." And the way you pronounce this is makahana kaike. Makahana kaike. And it can be translated, one way it can be translated in is that the knowing is in the doing, which is why executive functioning skills are not taught in kind of a didactic or traditional sense of the word. They're best learned when students see them, like I was saying, clearly seen, but they get practice. Like there's just certain things in life that you learn by doing them. Right. And if you're lucky enough to do that over and over and over, we'll get to this in just a moment, repetition, you're more likely to make these your own, like move into they're like yours so that you can transfer them to different environments. So Again, back to studentist environment and that the knowing is in the doing. That's going to be guiding us here. So the three keys I unpack in the book for equipping students with executive functioning skills, I've already mentioned them. Clarity, right? And for the sake of clarity, I just want you to know I'm going to show you examples of organized binder. This is not an organized binder webinar. This is not an organized binder intro. It's just my way of saying, hey, and this is what I tried to do with the book. Here's what it looks like in this program I designed, and here's how you can, or teachers have, iterated on that if they're not working with our program. Okay. So just keep that in mind as you see some of this. But I love this line, ambiguity is the enemy, right? If we're going to bring about clarity, we have to reduce ambiguity. And this is an actual student, we call it a student bundle. It's an organized binder. And when you open this up, you can see that those system files, they're the same color as those tabs, and that letter in the upper right-hand corner matches those tabs for just quick nonverbal cueing in the classroom. And where that came from in my practice is that most of my career I spent with multi-language learners, and it occurred to me early on, like, oh my gosh, I'm relying too heavily on verbal communication. And there's an equity issue there for students who are having to translate everything I'm saying and everything they're reading. So if I can rely for my procedures and my routines if I can rely less on words or not on words at all, then I'm going to free up some capacity for them to focus on what I'm trying to teach them. So absolute clarity, no question about it. And when we look at routine, when we look at the routine, consider Doug Lamove's comment here, or quote, consider one unmistakable driver of students' achievement, carefully built and practiced routines. It really can drive success. And here's kind of the thesis of this talk. Here's the thesis of my book, if I had to say. When teachers establish a predictable routine, and with each step of that routine, students get practice with a different executive functioning skill, they start to equip them with this sense of studentness. Okay? So it's not about teaching working memory or time and task management or organizational skills or goal setting. It's about establishing a routine where students, just by virtue of participating in the routine, they get to see, and I'll go into the modeling in just a little bit, they get to see these modeled, but they get practice actually doing them, and it doesn't interfere with the teacher's class. Okay? The reason daily is important is repetition. If we're going to learn anything, we got to try anything, right? You got to try it over and over and over and over when it comes to these skills and habits. And this is, if I could draw your attention to that green underline, it allows a conscious skill to transfer into one's subconscious, which frees up working memory. I'm going to give you a little science of learning lesson here in just a moment. But freeing up working memory is quite possibly one of the most important things we can do as teachers and educators, okay? Because it has to do with this sense of cognitive load. Okay? It relates to the amount of information working memory can hold at one time, okay? Working memory has a limited capacity. So instructional methods that should avoid overloading it with additional activities that don't contribute to learning. And here's what I want you to think about. Whether it's an elementary setting and you're going from grade level to grade level to grade level, or it's a middle school, high school, or even college setting where I'm going from class to class to class, even though the class is different, the content's different, the people are different, the teacher's different, but if the routine is the same, and if by virtue of participating in that predictable routine, I get practice with these skills, now I start to amplify how students are making them their own because they're getting practice with them in different learning contexts. Okay. And in terms of cognitive load, I want to tell you a quick story. I was speaking at a district symposium, a diversity, equity, inclusion symposium, and we were all gathering at a middle school. And as I walked on campus and was making my way to the auditorium where we were all gathering, I noticed the bell schedule on the wall. And this was a 6, 7, 8 school, middle school. And I had to double take because I looked at it again and they have 10 class periods a day plus lunch. And I think the class periods obviously had to be really, really short. And so I pulled a few staff members aside that worked at that particular school and asked them, am I seeing this right? And they said, yeah. That's our bell schedule. And I said, well, if you start to unpack that, think about being in fifth grade, and every year before, you probably had one teacher that loved on you, got to know you, hopefully you and your family, and that was like your experience. And then you make this quantum leap to middle school. The same is true for the ninth grade transition. And now I'm going from that one environment to 10 different environments, geographically speaking, with 10 different teachers, 10 different subjects, 10 different expectations, 10 different routines, if any. Like when you talk about cognitive load, the way I explain it is there's a certain amount of mental calories that those students are going to have to use to just navigate the school day. And if I'm using, because working memory has a limited capacity, if I'm using more of my mental calories just navigating the school day, right, then I have less available to focus on what I'm learning. And the equity issue comes with multi-language kiddos, with kids with learning differences, and we have to be mindful of that. Okay, so when we talk about cognitive load, there's two types that are part of learning that we are never going to get rid of, nor would we want to. Intrinsic load is when we're learning new information, and the germane load is when I'm making connections with what I already know. This is learning, right? There's a term here, if you are taking notes, I'd like you to write down called desirable difficulty. We want it to challenge, but not overdo on intrinsic and germane load. But we also don't want it to be so easy that there's not that challenge. Okay. But then there's the third type of load that we can influence as educators, as school leaders, right? Even as parents at home, something called the extraneous load, where I'm using that bank of mental calories in ways that don't contribute to learning. And another way to look at this graphically, if I can draw your attention to that middle band where it says extraneous load, right? There's germane and intrinsic. If I can reduce the extraneous load, that look to the right there, that overall capacity is increased. And those are more of those kind of mental calories I can use to focus on what I'm learning. So clarity, routine, and then modeling. All students need lessons in modeling with these skills. So back to an organized binder example, I was visiting a school in Arizona last month and snapped this picture. When you walk into this seventh grade math teacher's classroom, the class sample binder is sitting there available for students to see. And it's just a visual model of what it looks like to be organized in this classroom. Really simple to maintain. But when I get to accountability, I'm going to come back to this modeling piece because it's really important. Here's the sequence that we went over on the first webinar. I'm not going to do it justice. I just wanted you to see this would be kind of an organized binder sequence. And what we did throughout that session is I showed you the daily routine. And then I showed you how teachers who have read the book or taken our online course have iterated on that, again, without organized binder materials, to make this clarity, routine, and modeling part of their class. Okay. You can see all of that on that replay. What we're going to get to today are the last three executive functions: goal setting, accountability, and self-regulation. In organized binder, they look like this, and I'm going to start with those on each of them. So let's jump into goal setting. And this is where I wish we were all together because I have a question for you. But back to ambiguity. When you enter a new social role, think about that. It could be a new school year. It could be that transition to middle school. Expectations aren't always clear. So students need help not just setting vague goals, but figuring out a plan to reach them. That's that clarity piece. Now, if we were all together, maybe I'll have you put this in the chat just real quick. I'm looking for an acronym here. When we talk about goal setting, what's the first acronym that comes to mind? Just put the acronym in the chat and hit send. I can't see the chat, but I can see the numbers going up on the chat. And I'm just going to go out on a limb that somebody on our call put in the acronym SMART goals, SMART. Now, if we were all together, because this is really fun to do, I ask everybody before we define it, I'm like, what do those letters mean? Right? And it could be like this. There's 200 people here. We could be in a room together and I'd say, what does it mean? And you'll kind of see this look on people's faces like, well, it's measurable. It's like, and they'll kind of like, we'll kind of popcorn style and put it together. And my point is, when you look at SMART goals, um, as a goal setting mechanism, um, it's too convoluted for young people. Okay. And if you haven't read my book, please pick it up for this chapter if you're interested in goal setting. And so here's my best family feud moment. Um, Goal setting, when we look at goal setting, SMART goals are not a good mechanism for goal setting. They're a great tool for reviewing goals once they're set. Because if you ask a young person who realistically may have never set goals, is that specific? Is it achievable? And they're probably going to be like, I don't know. Is it time bound? I mean, it's almost too much. But once a goal is set, then I could look back and go, okay, is this specific enough? Right. So what we want to do is set goals first. If you're interested, you don't have to go back to SMART, but it can be really powerful as a goal revision and reflection tool. Okay. Here's the word I want you to keep in mind if you're taking notes. When we talk about goal setting, singular, singular. And what I mean by that is one goal, one sub goal, and one daily task. And here's how we work it with Organized Binder. We set a goal, then in the first quarter or the first term, we do it collectively, like everyone, just for the sake of modeling it. And then we have a social conversation around, okay, what do you do, or what do other students do? What are things you've seen that help students pass this class? And it's specific to the class. So I'm putting biology up here. Hypothetically, I was a science teacher, so I'm just throwing that out there, but it could be any grade level, any subject. But I think it's important to define that because as a learner at that middle school, the goals I set for myself in ELA might be different than math or history, right? So getting the context matters. The context matters with executive functions. But then what I want students to do is figure out for them what's one personalized sub goal they know is going to help them pass the class. And again, this is just kind of made up for our webinar here, but they maybe identify if I do all my homework, I'm more likely to pass the class. Fantastic. Great sub goal. Just one. I don't want you to say, and I'm going to review my notes, and I'm going to keep myself organized, and I'm going to pay attention in class. Nope, pick one. You want to try those others later? We can, because we're going to come back to our goals. And then what I want you to figure out is what we call character questions. When and where. And like, what do you mean? I'm just going to do all my homework. Like, well, tell me when and tell me where for your life. As a high school teacher, it's not unlikely that a student played sports after school or maybe had a job or took care of younger siblings. What is your life context and when is it realistic for you to complete that sub goal? Because the point here is if you just do this every day, then you're more likely to have your homework done. And if your homework's done, you're more likely to pass the class. So for the next 6, 7, 8 weeks, all I want you to do is focus on this daily task. And at the end of this, I'm going to talk about family engagement. Families and parents love this because I can say as their teacher, hey, can you just check in with them over the next 6 to 8 weeks and hold them accountable, but support them as they're trying this, right? And it's very clear. Now I can look at these, the goal, sub goal, and daily tasks through that SMART acronym now because it's kind of realistic, right? It's defined. And then at the end of the term, this was always one of my favorite things is we reflect on them. They're not just something we set and then we never come back to. They're a part of the fabric of the school year. And so did I accomplish my goal? Yes or no? Cool either way. This is no stakes, right? We're just modeling and setting goals. And most importantly, why? Why am I not? So if you did we want to focus on something else? Did you not? Did you not commit to this? Is that where you need to go this second quarter? So it starts to become very individualized, but very realistic. Okay. And this is a very I've quoted Paul Tough before in this session, but this one it's a little bit wordy, but I want to read it to you because it really nails this that mental contrasting with implementation intentions. MCII means concentrating on the positive outcome. That's my goal. And simultaneously concentrating on the obstacles in the way. That's my daily task. Okay. If I can do both at the same time, it creates a strong association between future and reality that signals the need to overcome my obstacles, complete my daily task, to attain my desired future. And having students start to just through action, like doing it, they're going to see that, wow, I'm actually accomplishing this goal. So again, not to say don't use the SMART acronym. I would encourage you to keep singular with your goals and review it through the SMART acronym. Now let's talk about accountability real quick. And I lean into this quite heavily in the book. There's no point in holding students accountable if you don't fundamentally believe in their both desire to and ability to succeed. I think that's really important. And if we're all about accountability and that piece is missing, it can turn kind of almost like, I don't want to say authoritarian, but it can go in a direction that we don't want to go. So for organized binder with accountability, the accountability is around the portfolio. It's around learning to keep and stay organized. And so what we do is periodically throughout the semester, and it's prearranged because back to that time crunch, when do teachers have time to check student portfolios? Well, they can if they put it on the calendar ahead of time and lesson plan accordingly. It's really not that hard. But the point is, I have my class sample. It's updated every day. This is what the binder should look like. Okay. And I'm just going to pause. If this were an organized binder school, I'm just going to use this. I think it'll bring the most clarity here. Every about 4 weeks, some do it a lot more frequently, but at a minimum, every 4 weeks, I'm going to pause and make sure your portfolio looks like mine. Okay. If you do go back and review that previous session, or if you were with us, you know that the table of contents in the academic toolkit, there's a very simple way to set students up to create a year-long portfolio of their learning, right? An evidence binder or data binder. Literally, from the first day you implement this to the end. In order to make sure that happens, we have to check them or hold them accountable organizationally, them being students, so that at the end, they have that portfolio put together, as opposed to just kind of hoping they do it because it's modeled. Just the model and that by itself isn't enough. Okay. So these are some pictures that teachers have sent in. I tell a story in the book. This is actually taken a few years ago in my classroom, where that big giant binder, which is not an organized binder, you can see that giant wad of paper. A student, I had finally had enough. I gave her 3 or 4 binders, had her lab table mates help her out and put everything in piles based on subject. I'm leaving out a bunch of the story, but in the end, and literally within like 10 minutes, she had her binder for my class organized. And I walked by just to kind of congratulate her and say, hey, make sure you do that for your other classes too. And she looked up at me and she kind of patted herself and she goes, and you could tell she was kind of in shock a little bit. She's like, Mr. Rose, I actually feel better. Right? I feel better. And there's some truth to that. Like we feel better. We're more efficient. We're more effective. We're more likely to be successful when we're learning if we learn how to get and stay organized. We work with some colleges as well. This is a college professor that sent in that blue binder is for the students, all their other classes, and the organized binder is below, right? You're just less likely to be successful if you're struggling organizationally. So what I want you to see here is if I can model this for students and I hold them accountable, here's another part of my thesis. This binder is the tool to participate in the routine that we're establishing. So clarity, routine, and modeling. Each step of that routine, there's a different part in the binder that we're using. And they're all different colors. So I have all those nonverbal visual cues. It could be projected in the class, but if there's 30 kids in the class, I'm going to see where they're turning as well, right? Trying to reduce that cognitive load. So if this is the tool to participate in the routine, and if by virtue of participating in that daily routine, I get practice with and exposure to these executive functions, by holding you accountable to get and stay organized, I'm actually holding you accountable to develop your executive functioning skills. So I hope that makes sense. That's part of this work is organization matters because this is the tool to participate in that routine. And I would much rather have my students here at the end of a school year like this with these unit chunks and their toolkit, and there's a bunch of other stuff in there, neatly organized. It all goes back in their portfolio and they take it with them. Something to consider if you're going to do binder or portfolio checks, we gamify it, and it's gamified not in a video game way, but students trade their portfolios and they check them before the teacher does. And that's a way to reinforce, of course, organization. And we also know that if I'm looking at the same mistake every day on my own, I may not see it as when a peer or a classmate checks it and so we got to fix this, this, and this. And then they get to fix it before the teacher comes over and checks it. And the whole point is that this organized binder is, and these are not organized binders, complete at the end of the school year. And I can tell you very confidently, students love these. If your school does any type of student-led conferences, consider this organizational piece of accountability to guarantee that they can confidently walk through that and lead that student-led conference. It can be quite powerful. All right, last one, and then we can do some Q&A. Self-regulation. So you'll see in the book, if you've read it or if you pick up a copy, instead of writing a chapter, so the kind of frame of the book is each of these executive functioning skills have their own chapter. Some have two. And self-regulation, this whole thing is about giving students chances for self-regulated learning. And I want to just mention that. I talk in more detail in the book about it, of course. But, there's a very explicit and clear routine to the day, which presents a question for students every day. Do I engage in that routine? Do I not? There's a very clear way we organize ourselves. It's modeled for students, but there's still that, I guess, commitment or challenge. Do I take the time to put that behind my table of contents or in the toolkit, or do I just stuff it in the book bag like you saw? Yes, we have distilled our goals down into this actionable daily task, this thing I'm going to try for this first few weeks. Am I going to do that or am I not? So it's all of it because of the clarity and the physical binder, the portfolio, and the modeling. It's right there for students, and it's a good confrontation, but a challenge around self-regulation. Every step of this, the whole thing is. So what you'll see in the book is that as opposed to its own chapter, each chapter has a kind of a concluding part on how this relates to and gives students practice with self-regulation. But I thought I would show this just almost kind of for fun. This, of course, the colleges we work with don't use this as an optional part of organized binder, because even in some K-12s, it's not applicable, K-12 schools. But the idea here is this is not like a nurse's pass or a school pass or anything. It's almost like currency. Students get 3 of these per semester or trimester, whatever the setup is. And when it's appropriate, they're free to use them, right? And you can see there, like I might have to go up, do something at the office. It's nothing that's like official, right? Might even just have to get some air. But the caveat is any of these that are unused at the end of this semester are worth one missing assignment. Not, of course, and students will be the first to ask, if I miss an exam or an essay or something big. No, we're talking about your common work in class or outside of class. But it gives a little tension there. Do I really need to use this or not? Of course I can. You're not held back, but just kind of a fun way to incorporate self-regulation. And I have a bunch of funny stories about that, but we don't have time for it. All right. So I really want you also to think about when we talk about this development of studentness or executive functioning skills or the organized binder program, we call it, and I say we, my team and I, an education success platform. And upon that platform, that's where we're going to build success. And there's 3 parts to that platform. Of course, the student and starting to get practice with and hone these skills. The school, the teacher, the classroom, that environment. But the third part is executive functioning skills. And I don't have any non-organized binder things to show you here, but I want you to think about this because back to what I said at the beginning, have you ever met a parent, or just think about it, that doesn't want their kid to set goals and be in on it, like be able to see it, or doesn't want them to learn to get and stay organized, or get practice with how do I keep a calendar and planning and time management? Like all of these things parents want. So what we have, and this is what you're seeing here, is a student bundle, and there's a guide for families that goes home. It comes with the bundle for students, but what it is, it's meant to be a gift to the family, and it talks about, you can see there's the daily routine, and it takes it a step further. Each part of the routine, all the way through, including everything we talked about today, there's a box there that says how can you support, and it gives them specific tasks or ideas or questions to ask. And what we found, one, parents love that clarity for them. Like I can know exactly what my student did today, and if there's homework, it's going to be right here, and where I can access all of their work, and they're like that clarity. Families absolutely love it, but it takes the conversation beyond how was school today? Do you have any homework? What'd you learn? Right? Some of those like tried and true. And if your kids are like my kids, they're like, nothing. I'm like, you didn't learn anything new today, the whole day. Nope, we didn't do anything new. Right? So this takes that conversation kind of deeper. And of course, there's an accountability piece. And when we talked about that organization, that peer self check is part of this guide. So that if this was my kid or your kid, we could do this at home and preemptively before that check that happens in class to make sure they're successful. So, goal setting, accountability, self regulation, and involving families. Like, I encourage you to think through again all of this back to your environment. I mean this. I don't mean this to be an organized binder intro. I want you to think, okay, how could you engage families in some of this that you could incorporate around clarity, routine, and modeling in your classroom? I always end with Dweck. I love this quote: simply raising standards in our schools without giving students the means of reaching them is a recipe for disaster. It just pushes the poorly prepared or poorly motivated students into failure and out of school. And I think in post-pandemic classrooms, um, this has never been truer in my mind. So this is me. If you have a copy of the book, you can look on page 168. Jessica, my friend who introduced me, I asked permission if I could actually put my email in there because I love and want to hear from you. If you want to learn more about Organized Binder, you can do that. There's social handles, but that's me. That's my personal email, and I really am committed to getting back. That's not some list serve. That's not going to go into some black hole of an email. That is me, and I will reply. So we're going to do some Q&A and chat here, but if you want to talk further or have questions, let me know. I'd love to hear from you.
All right, and now I think a couple of different questions came in. Yes, and you can use that QR code on the screen as well to download your certificate.
Cool.
And first we have a question from Elizabeth. Is there another acronym we can use for goal setting instead of SMART?
I don't have one. That's a great question. There may be others. That Elizabeth, from my experience, that's the most commonly used, and as I mentioned, quite convoluted. So I don't have an acronym for you, but I like to use that word singular. Hope that's helpful.
And then Amy Young asked, will student support services at colleges participate with Organized Binder?
Yes. One of the coolest, Amy, one of the coolest projects we did was with a community college, and counseling and student support funded the program, and professors could opt in community college in particular, but 4 years as well. We were, if a student's struggling with executive functioning skills, they now find themselves with largely with teachers who are content area experts that may lack any pedagogy experience or training, right? AKA credential programs and whatnot. So it can kind of be a perfect storm if I'm lacking these skills and I don't have those supports. And so they rolled it out. We got to train all the professors and support them. And the support staff was part of that as well. And if students needed further support, they could get that with that community, not just in their class. So absolutely. Long-winded answer of saying yes.
All right. And then Elizabeth also asked, any suggestions on how to modify for special education students who struggle with executive functioning but also struggle with reading and writing?
Yeah, I'm not skirting this one at all. It's a little bit longer answer, but it depends on the context, but there's a way like oftentimes so we skipped over this, so please go back and watch the first one or read the book because this is all tier one work. And ideally, students with an IEP, students in special education that are in a more inclusive environment, as much as possible, least restrictive, have those additional supports. And it could be even be as simple as pre-populating certain things. It could be them having access to what they're going to write a little bit earlier. So there's ways to do that in particular because there's the support of the student with the IEP. So their special education teacher, whoever, whatever that might look like. And a lot of that work can happen in the special ed or support class, but when they're coming back into the gen ed class with everyone else, they're kind of set up for success. But we would have to talk more specifically. So please email me. I'd love to chat with you.
And then Patricia asked about the color coding. Have you run into any issues with students who have impaired color vision?
Mm. Not in any significant way. Certainly, there's been students at schools. I don't know if I ever had any students in my classes, but keep in mind, to answer your question, yes, that's happened. But the color is just one part of that cueing. There's the letter, and then what's projected. Now I'm speaking organized binder speak here, but that which is projected in the class, and that's what students have in them. Now, the organized binder system files, not the content and curriculum that the teachers are doing. Again, that's all session one. They're identical. So it's for reasons that you mentioned and others for that matter. So even though I may not be able to pick up that that's blue and that's gold, it looks identical to what I have in front of me. And most of the time, that's enough cueing for students. And also, I'll just add to that, once this routine is in place, it's the students who drive it. It just becomes ritual. So.
Mhm. And then Kim asked, how would you suggest using organized binder for students in kindergarten or lower grades?
Mm,
Since kindergarten students can't write with full independence, would the
yeah.
teacher then aid in writing, creating and writing goals with them?
Yeah, great question. And let me be absolutely clear about this. I do not want kindergarten students trying to write in a binder like some of the things I was showing you. So that you'll also notice the subtitle of my book is grades 3 through 12, and that was really for that reason. Like part of me wishes I didn't add that. But I didn't want anybody feeling like, hey, this isn't applicable to me. And there's kind of an inflection point there, third, fourth, and above, where we're oftentimes unspoken expectation of students becoming more independent learners. But in the TKK 1 2, definitely modified. And if well, let's back up. Of course, you can set goals in kinder. You know that. And the interesting thing, sit down with a kinder teacher and they're like, "Oh, this is all the stuff we need to be teaching, not content and curriculum. It's executive functioning skills." And we get so content focused as we move up through the grades. Um, but if the teacher, and some do, no doubt, want to have an organized binder, it's more of a teacher driven portfolio. So we're going to set goals, and how that looks in class is not students necessarily, of course, writing their goals, but establishing goals, and they can be recorded there. Same thing with like exemplars. And again, this is session one with the organization. But yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head that it was going to look different in a kinder, and I would say K 1 2 class for sure.
Thank you. I think that answered questions for a couple of people who posted in the chat.
That's
And
always a big
then,
one.
yeah, I think then we had another question from Francisco. How would you recommend using the organized binder system in a bilingual classroom?
Um,
Mm.
Francisco, tell me more. Bilingual classroom meaning there's bilingual students, or it's a history class that's being taught in French or Spanish or whatnot.
Mhm. It's bilingual middle school math taught in English and Spanish, looks like.
Oh, okay. So one more question, and then we'll, if not, I'll say the same thing I said before. Email me because it's always gets very specific. So are these students bilingual? So they speak Spanish and English?
Most are newcomers,
Ah,
looks
okay.
like.
So two things there. If they're newcomers and they're not, this is very similar to the school I taught at most of my career. We had primary language classes in Spanish, and then a tiered or kind of sheltered level between that was kind of bilingual. That's where I spent most of my career, and then all English classes. And if it's prohibitive where students like literally can't, the text in an organized binder is very minimal. So a lot of teachers in that situation will want to keep the English version of it so that it's just practice, right? If you were to kind of look through the last session, even what I went over today, there's that blue page, I guess, has some text, but it's really repeated. But the whole program is translated into Spanish. So if that's a better fit, it's translated into French as well. So it's really about getting specific for you and your students' needs. So that might be, Francisco, that might be a good email one. Send me an email. Let me go back
Mhm.
to that so we keep it.
Right, and I think that covers everything that I saw come in.
Okay.
Uh, but yeah, if anyone has any questions that didn't get answered today, feel free to send them to us at info@corwin.com. And of course, you can contact Mitch directly with the address on the screen as well. And thank you so much to Mitch and to everyone who joined us and
Oh,
participated
thank you.
today.
So
Uh,
fun.
and I hope you have a great rest of your day. You'll get access to the recording that'll be sent out in our emails shortly. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.